It took Nolan a while to find the right address. He was wandering for an hour among the identical high-rise buildings, lined up in a kind of vicious circle. Finally, a miracle happened, and Nolan found his customer's block, and in 5 minutes he was already sitting and configuring a new gaming laptop. When he had finished adjusting, Nolan hurried out of the apartment, and only when he got down to the first floor, he thought he should have asked how to find the 6th building, where the next client was waiting for him. The guy was about to return to the client, but suddenly he heard some kind of pitiful meow. He stopped, thought a little, and went toward the sound. Nolan turned the corner and found himself in a narrow, dark alley, where the sun's rays barely penetrated. Nolan looked around. There were large trash cans along the back wall of the houses, and steam was puffing out of the hood. A few paces further, he saw a girl, about 16 years old, desperately trying to pull a kitten off the pipe above her head, but not succeeding. The kitten was frightened and stepping over with his paws, but he never jumped. "His paws hurt, the pipe's very hot," the girl said in a chilly voice. "Could you help me?" Nolan couldn't reach the pipe either, but he jumped up with force and grabbed the kitten's paw and pulled him toward him, then handed the unfortunate pet to the girl. She stroked him gently and began to calm him, whispering something in his ear. "Well, why don't we get out of here? The kitten is saved and it's kind of gloomy out here," said Nolan. "You don't want to stay here, do you?" "I'll stay here better," replied the girl. "I live here. In that small closet over there?" Nolan looked at the girl in surprise. He tried to get details from her, but all he found out was that her name was Rebecca, and she had been living here for about 6 months. "And why do you care about me anyway?" "Thank you for saving the kitten, but then I will do myself." She suddenly became angry. Nolan was confused and did not know what to answer. He decided to change the conversation to another topic and asked if she knows where the building number 6 is. As it turned out, Rebecca knew this place very well, as she had once lived there, and she agreed to accompany Nolan. When they arrived at the place, Nolan asked her to wait for him and went to the apartment he needed. Already there, configuring the computer, he asked the landlady if she knew the strange girl who lived in the alley behind the neighbouring block. "You mean Rebecca?" sighed the woman. "Yes, the poor orphan. We all try to help her as much as we can, with food and things. I've known her since she was a little girl. A nice girl. She lived next door, and then they got in trouble." When Nolan came out of the entrance a half-hour later, Rebecca was sitting on the bench. He cautiously approached her and said, "Rebecca, please don't think anything bad. I live with my parents, but they are not home now and won't be back until tomorrow. Let's go to my place. There you can bathe and eat. You can stay if you like, but if not, you can come back here. I just want to help. After all, you have a cold." Rebecca looked at him attentively and asked, nodding at the kitten she was still holding close to her, "What about him?" "We'll take him with us. I understand that he is essential for you, and you can't go anywhere without him." A couple of hours later, Rebecca, red-faced from a pleasant bath, was sitting at the table, wrapped in Nolan's bathrobe, and eating with appetite everything in front of her. The likewise clean, bathed kitten was also devouring his delicacies. Over a cup of tea, Rebecca told Nolan what had happened to her. "We were all fine. I lived with my grandfather, mother and father. My parents worked in the medical field. I was in school. Grandpa died when I was in 7th grade, and 6 months later, my dad died in a car accident." my mum and I were left alone. She was very nervous. She wasn't herself. She was quiet all the time. I tried to talk to her, felt sorry for her, but it was like she didn't hear me. And soon my mother began to leave the house often and for long periods of time. I thought she was at work, so one day I went to see her, but they told me she hadn't worked in months. I ran out of money. I couldn't even buy bread with it. And then my mother called and said not to look for her, that she would now live in the beautiful place where everyone loves and understands her. Soon after that, some strangers came and said that our apartment was theirs from now on. They showed some papers signed by my mum, and the neighbours said that she probably got into some bad organisation. Now I think so too. I lived with a neighbour, but she had a large family, and I did not want to embarrass them. So since then I have been living almost on the street. The janitor took pity on me and gave me the keys to a small utility room where he keeps his cleaning equipment. There I sleep. My textbooks and things lay there. Nolan made a bed for Rebecca in his room, and he made his bed in the living room. He tossed and turned for a long time, remembering her story, and could only fall asleep in the morning. And closer to dinner his parents returned. Mr. and Mrs. Rogers were surprised to see their son sleeping in the living room, but when an unfamiliar girl came out of his room, they were simply amazed. Nolan walked with his parents into the kitchen, where they had an unpleasant conversation. The parents did not appreciate their son's noble impulse and demanded that Rebecca leave their house immediately. "Are you out of your mind?" resented Mrs. Rogers. "What if she's contagious or a thief? I don't even want to hear about her staying at our house." The father was of the same opinion, and Nolan, realizing that it was useless to persuade them, went to Rebecca. She had already changed into her clothes and was standing with a kitten in her arms. "I have heard everything. They're right, I have to leave. I do not belong here. Thank you very much for being so kind to me." "All right, let's go," he answered, and taking something from the table, he stepped resolutely toward the door. "But you're not going back on the street again?" Hearing the sound of the front door slamming, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers came out of the kitchen, but there was no one else in the house with them. Nolan quickly found a cosy little room for Rebecca through an ad, and introduced her as his sister to the landlady. He paid for several months in advance and bought the girl all the necessary things, food and medicine. Rebecca was stunned and tried to refuse, but Nolan was adamant. Only in the evening the young man returned home. His parents, who were angry about his actions, welcomed him quietly. They had had time to discuss what had happened, and both came to the conclusion that their son had to be married immediately, so that all these foolish things go out of his head. "Nolan, you have such prospects. You're doing well in business, and suddenly you do such a rash thing. You brought a homeless girl to our house. What about Kelly? Have you changed your mind about marrying her yet?" "Actually, I never intended to marry her," Nolan said wearily. "You made that up for yourself." "But she's such a nice girl, and from a decent family, not like your Rebecca." Nolan didn't listen any further and went off to his room. And a month later, on Mrs. Rogers's birthday, Kelly and her parents were invited to a celebratory dinner, which looked more like matchmaking. But Nolan pretended not to notice anything. Even when Kelly asked to see her off, making obvious hints, he simply said goodbye to her at the door of her apartment and returned home. Then they met more than once at their parents' joint events, but all the time Nolan thought only of Rebecca. Nolan liked to spend time with Rebecca. She had recently enrolled in a massage class, and when he visited her, she happily told him about her first successes. The girl became very close to her landlady, and practicing her skills on her, she quickly rid the woman of many years of back problems. In her turn, the landlady taught her how to manage the household properly, and she also brought her girlfriends to her for massages. As time went on, one evening, Kelly asked Nolan to inspect her laptop. He arrived and was very surprised at the girl's appearance. She met him in a transparent negligee that barely concealed her. Kelly rushed to him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and confessed her love. "Nolan, why are you avoiding me? I've been in love with you for a long time. We're adults, and you're acting like a schoolboy." "Kelly," sighed Nolan, pulling back, "you're very nice, really, but I am in love with another woman, and we're getting married soon." "With whom? With that homeless girl?" "Come on," shouted Kelly suddenly. "It won't work out. I was at her place today, and I told her that you're with her out of pity, and you and I are in love. Understand, your parents will never accept someone like her." Kelly did not have time to finish her sentence, for Nolan jumped out of the apartment and rushed down the stairs. He was afraid he wouldn't make it in time, but luckily Rebecca was home. He rushed to her and hugged her tightly. "Rebecca, my love," he whispered, "I was so afraid you would leave." "I wanted to, but I couldn't," replied Rebecca, and pressed herself even tighter against Nolan's chest. "I love you so much." They were married a month later. They didn't celebrate or invite guests, and even Nolan's parents didn't come to congratulate the newlyweds, but he was still happy because he had his Rebecca by his side. Another year passed. Rebecca went to college to become a chiropractor, and Nolan's business was blooming. One day, his father called him and told him that his mother had become quite ill. The woman was constantly tormented by neuralgia and high blood pressure, so that she could almost not get up. The father asked Nolan to come, and he showed up at his parents' house with his wife. Rebecca immediately approached her mother-in-law. "Mrs. Rogers, you shouldn't be angry with me. I really love your son. And now let me give you a massage. I know how to do it, and I would love to do it." "What can you know about massage?" Mrs. Rogers grumbled. "I've only known one real masseur in my life. That's who really has golden hands. But unfortunately, he has passed away, and no one has been able to help me since. You probably haven't even heard of him." But when Mrs. Rogers said the name of this famous masseur, and Rebecca calmly looked at the woman and said, "Well, why? I've heard of him. That's my grandfather. I learned a lot from him in my time, and also my father. He was a physician, and my mother used to work in a pharmacy." Mrs. Rogers looked at Rebecca stunned, unable to believe her words. Meanwhile, Rebecca had finished her preparations and began the massage. When the session came to an end, Mrs. Rogers, after a long silence, spoke. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. But please understand, we wanted our only son to be happy. And now we are left all alone. For whom should we live?" "Maybe for your grandson?" smiled Rebecca. "Nolan doesn't know yet. You're the first one I've shared it with." Mrs. Rogers slowly stood up, and realizing that she no longer felt pain, she wept and said, "Thank you, honey," and added with a smile, And you really do have golden hands from your grandfather.